My name is Natalie Carter, and I'm 30 years old. I'm a software engineer now, working for a company that values data and logic, something I've clung to my entire life. Because when it came to my family, nothing ever made sense. Not the way they looked at me, not the way they whispered when I walked into a room, and especially not the way they loved. Because whatever it was they gave me, it wasn't love. I always knew I was adopted. It wasn't some shocking revelation. My parents, Jack and Diane Carter, told me when I was around 6. They said it like it was this beautiful gift, like I was chosen. But even then, I remember sensing something cold in the way they said it, like it was a favor, like I had to be grateful just for being let into their home. My two older brothers, Caleb and Mark, were Jack and Diane's biological children. They were the golden boys. Their laughter filled the house. Their sports trophies lined every shelf. Their birthdays were national holidays in our household. Me? I was the one who got hand-me-downs, the one who had to say thank you 10 times more just to get half the recognition. I wasn't mistreated in the traditional sense. There were no beatings, no outright cruelty, just distance, indifference, quiet rejection that grew roots deep inside me. In school, I excelled, maybe because books never made me feel like an outsider. I taught myself how to code when I was 13 and built my first website before I could drive. But when I showed it to my parents, they just blinked and said, "That's nice, sweetie." Then asked Mark how football practice went. It hurt, more than I ever let on. Still, I told myself it didn't matter, that one day I'd make it on my own, that I didn't need their approval or anyone's really. I went to college on a scholarship, took internships during breaks, and saved every penny. By the time I turned 28, I had my own apartment, a solid job, and a life far away from the small town shadows I grew up in. But no matter how far I ran, I never stopped being the adopted one. And when the call came that both my parents had died suddenly in a car accident, I was stunned, not just by the loss, but by the strange calm I felt. There was sadness, of course, but not the kind that breaks you, more like the kind that leaves a question mark inside your chest. What came next, though? That would break me. I flew home for the funeral, said all the right words, and nodded through the eulogies that painted Jack and Diane as perfect parents. Caleb and Mark gave heartfelt speeches. I stood to speak too, but was gently told by an uncle to maybe let the real kids do the talking. That night, I stayed in my childhood room, still filled with my secondhand furniture, while Caleb had already claimed the master bedroom until the estate was settled. The next morning, we gathered at the law office for the reading of the will. I didn't expect much, maybe a sentimental note, a token gesture. But as the lawyer read line by line, detailing the house, the stocks, the insurance policies, he never once said my name, not even once. And then Caleb leaned back with a smug grin and said, loud enough for the room to hear, "Guess blood really is thicker than paperwork." I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, silent, but inside, something had begun to crack. Something deep. Something that would soon rise. If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, like no matter what you did, you were never enough, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay with me. Because what happened next changed everything. I sat frozen in that sterile conference room, sunlight pouring through the blinds like it was any normal Tuesday. The lawyer, Mr. Gibbons, continued reading as if my world hadn't just tilted sideways. He spoke with the kind of detached professionalism that made the words land even harder. To our beloved sons, Caleb and Mark Carter, he read, we leave the family home, the 401k, all shares of Carter and Sons hardware, and the life insurance policies split evenly. Then he closed the folder. That was it. I waited. Surely there had to be something more. A letter, a line, a single sentence. But Mr. Gibbons simply looked up and said, "That concludes the reading of the will." I blinked. My throat tightened. "Excuse me," I said quietly. "Is that all? There's nothing for me?" Mr. Gibbons hesitated. His eyes flicked to Caleb and Mark, then back to me. "There was no mention of you in the will, Ms. Carter." Caleb didn't even try to hide his smirk. "Don't take it personally, Nat. You were more like the foster experiment." Mark chuckled under his breath, nudging him. I should have stormed out. I should have screamed at them. But I just sat there, numb. Mr. Gibbons cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. If you'd all excuse me for a moment, I need to gather some additional documents for the estate. He left the room, leaving me alone with two men who shared my last name, but never once made me feel like a sister. Caleb stood and stretched. Well, I guess it's time to start clearing out the house. You can come by and grab your stuff, if you still have any. I said nothing. Mark followed him out, tossing over his shoulder. Hey, at least now you don't have to pretend you were one of us. Once the door shut behind them, I sat alone in silence. That silence said more than any insult ever could. I wasn't grieving the loss of money. It wasn't about property or inheritance. It was about being erased. Like I'd never mattered. Like the years I spent trying to belong were just a footnote to be discarded when it was no longer convenient. A few minutes later, Mr. Gibbons returned. His face had changed, less guarded, more focused. Ms. Carter, he said, lowering his voice, would you mind staying for a few more minutes? There's something you need to see. My heart thumped. What is it? He hesitated, then pulled out a smaller manila envelope from his briefcase. It was old, yellowed with time, edges slightly frayed. My name was written on the front in neat cursive, Natalie. I was instructed to give this to you privately after the reading of the main will, he said. It's dated almost 3 decades ago. Precedes any formal documentation I have on your adoption. He handed it to me gently. I took it with trembling fingers. My hands knew before my brain did. This wasn't from Jack or Diane. The handwriting, it was different, softer, more intentional. Inside was a letter. I unfolded it slowly, heart pounding. To my dearest Natalie, if you're reading this, then the time has come for truths that were long kept in the shadows. I read the first few lines, and then everything around me blurred. The room, the grief, the betrayal. It all dissolved under the weight of the words I held in my hands. This wasn't just a letter. This was the beginning of a story I had never been told, and I was finally ready to hear it. The air around me felt heavier as I held the letter in both hands. Mr. Gibbons had left the room again, giving me privacy. I was glad. What I was holding, it didn't belong in front of people who laughed when I was erased from my own family's story. I stared at the first line again, as if rereading it would make it hurt less. To my dearest Natalie, if you're reading this, then the time has come for truths that were long kept in the shadows. I'm sorry I couldn't be there to give them to you myself. The handwriting was soft, looping. It looked like the kind of script you'd find in a diary. Not legal documents, not the cold, sharp words I was used to seeing in courtrooms or will readings. My name is Grace Whitmore, and I am your birth mother. There it was, written in ink, no longer a question, a suspicion, a wound without a name. I kept reading. I was 23 when I had you. I wasn't ready and I was scared, but that never meant I didn't love you. Every moment since I have. I chose Jack and Diane because I thought they would give you everything I couldn't. Safety, stability, love. I didn't know how wrong I'd be. My heart dropped. Grace knew. Somehow she knew what kind of life I would have, what they would take from me under the guise of raising me. Before I gave you to them, I set up a trust, a portion of the small inheritance left to me by my father, your grandfather. I asked that it be held in your name, to be passed on when you turn 25. I gave them everything, documentation, instructions, legal authorization. They agreed. But I never received anything. If they never told you, if they kept it from you, I'm sorry. I hope you find this letter before it's too late. Tears blurred the words, but I kept reading. I've written to the lawyer you're probably with right now, Mr. Gibbons. I left the details with him. If you have this letter, then he knows what to do. I dropped the pages into my lap, the final line still echoing in my mind. You are not forgotten. You were never less than. You are my daughter, and everything I ever hoped for. I couldn't breathe, not because of grief, but because for the first time in 30 years, someone had seen me, really seen me. I clutched the letter to my chest, closed my eyes, and just let it happen. The tears, the years of feeling like a visitor in my own life, all of it poured out in that cold law office chair. When I looked up again, Mr. Gibbons was standing quietly in the doorway. He didn't say a word, just waited for me to nod, and when I did, he came over and sat down. "I've been holding on to that letter for decades," he said. "Your birth mother left it with me the day after your adoption was finalized. She was adamant it be given to you if things didn't go the way she hoped." I wiped my face. "She mentioned a trust. She said you knew what to do." He nodded, then reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a thin blue folder, one that looked untouched by time. "I do," he said. "And Natalie, what your birth mother left you, it's not just sentimental." I stared at the folder. Something shifted in me, an awareness, a flicker of power, a small voice that whispered, "You are not helpless anymore." Because for the first time, I had something my adoptive family didn't see coming, the truth and proof. They thought erasing me from the will would end the story, but the real story was just beginning. And it started with a mother who loved me enough to plan for justice, 30 years in advance. I stared at the folder Mr. Gibbons had placed in front of me. His fingers rested on it for a beat longer, like he knew this moment was bigger than numbers on paper. Then he slid it toward me. "Natalie," he said gently, "this is a full account of the trust your birth mother set up for you. It's been accruing interest for almost 30 years. I opened it slowly, half afraid of what I'd find, half afraid to believe it could be real. Inside were pages, legal documents, signed and notarized, dated 6 months before I was born. They outlined a transfer of funds and property from a Grace Whitmore to a trustee, Diane Carter, my adoptive mother, the woman who had spent her life calling me fortunate to even have a roof over my head. I scanned the numbers. At the time of creation, the fund was modest, about $150,000, but it had been invested, wisely, carefully. Over the years, it had matured, dividends, capital gains, and interest. The final page showed the current value, $3.2 million. I blinked, reread it. 3.2 million. It felt surreal. I'd grown up watching every dollar, coupon clipping through childhood, working part-time jobs to afford my textbooks in college. I once lived on instant noodles for a month to pay rent on time. And all this time, this existed. "This was supposed to be transferred to you when you turned 25, Mr. Gibbons said. "I sent multiple letters to the Carter household. None were answered." Of course they weren't. Diane probably saw the envelopes, recognized the name, and tossed them into the trash without a second thought. "I had no idea," I whispered. Why didn't she ever say anything?" He sighed. "I can't speak to her motives. But from a legal standpoint, the trust was never claimed, which means it still belongs to you. Entirely." A chill ran down my spine. They had lied, not just by omission, but through deliberate concealment. They robbed me of my birthright while preaching about gratitude, while telling me I should be thankful just to sit at the table. And the worst part? They knew. There was no way they forgot about a trust fund this size. No way they didn't remember being appointed custodians of someone else's inheritance. They just never expected I'd find out. But I had. And now everything had changed. "I want to activate the trust," I said firmly. "And I want to press for investigation. If they knowingly withheld access to my legal inheritance, that's fraud, isn't it?" Mr. Gibbons didn't flinch. "It very well could be. And given the paper trail your mother left behind, they may be liable for civil penalties, possibly more." I leaned back in my chair, breath shaky, but my voice steady. "They took everything from me. My identity. My chance to know who I came from. They made me believe I was lucky to be included in their family, while keeping my family's legacy locked in a drawer." He nodded. "And now?" he asked. I closed the folder and looked out the window. "Now," I said, "I'm going to reclaim it all. Not just the money, the truth, my name, my place. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't begging to be included. I was standing in the center of a legacy they tried to bury, holding the key to everything they didn't want me to have. And I wasn't going to let them get away with it. They thought I'd walk away quietly, too ashamed to fight back. But what they didn't realize is, when you've been silent your whole life, the truth becomes the loudest voice you've ever had. The next morning, I woke up before the sun rose. I hadn't really slept, just laid in bed with the letter from Grace pressed against my chest, rereading it until the words imprinted themselves onto my bones. I didn't want the money. I wanted her. I wanted to know who she was, what her voice sounded like, what books she read, whether she liked thunderstorms or warm mornings. I wanted the kind of things money couldn't buy: connection, origin, truth. And so, I started looking. The first place I searched was the return address on the envelope Grace had left. It was from a town called Cedar Hollow, about 2 hours north of where I grew up. A quick search told me it was a quiet little place, population under 5,000, the kind of town where everybody knew everybody, and nothing really stayed secret for long. I drove out that afternoon. The landscape shifted as I got closer. Less concrete, more pine trees, less noise, more sky. I didn't have a plan, just a name, a location, and a desperate need to feel close to her. The first stop was the public library. I wasn't even sure why. It just felt right. And that's where I found her. Not in person, of course. Grace Whitmore had passed away 7 years ago, according to the obituary taped to the archive room wall. But her presence was everywhere, in newspaper clippings, old book reviews, and a small memorial shelf of local authors. She was a writer, a real one. 4 published novels, dozens of short stories, mostly women's fiction, literary, a touch of memoir in every page. And when I read them, really read them, it felt like opening a door into a locked room inside my own soul. One story in particular stopped me cold. It was called The Borrowed Room. It was about a young woman who gave her newborn daughter to another family, one she believed could offer a better life. But the daughter grew up lonely, unsure of her place. The mother, in secret, sent birthday cards she was never sure were received. She followed her daughter's life through secondhand whispers, until illness silenced her voice before a reunion could ever take place. I read it 3 times in the library corner, tears streaming down my face. It wasn't fiction. It was our story. Grace had been grieving me, loving me, through her words, even as I lived a life completely disconnected from her. I asked the librarian if anyone who knew Grace was still around. She thought for a moment, then smiled gently. Try the Willow Creek retirement home down the road. Grace volunteered there every Thursday. Her best friend still lives there, name's Edna Lang. I went straight there, heart pounding. Edna was in her early 80s, sharp as a tack, and when I told her who I was, her eyes filled with tears instantly. I knew you'd come one day, she whispered, taking my hands in hers. Grace talked about you every week. Not a single Thursday passed where she didn't pray you were happy. We talked for hours. She told me about Grace's laugh, her stubborn streak, her love for raspberry tea and handwritten letters. She even gave me a photo, one I'd never seen before. It was Grace, holding a newborn baby, holding me. I broke down in her arms like a child. This wasn't just about an inheritance anymore. This was about reclaiming something no one ever gave me the chance to have. A mother's love, quiet, fierce, enduring across decades of silence. I had spent so long believing I wasn't wanted. But Grace wrote about me, dreamed of me, fought for me, even when the world told her she had to let me go. And now it was my turn to fight, for her memory and for the truth she tried to protect. I drove straight from Cedar Hollow to my parents' house, the house I'd grown up in, the one I was apparently never meant to inherit. Mark's truck was in the driveway. Caleb's silver sedan, too. They were already inside, no doubt sorting through the house, dividing furniture and valuables like scavengers. I walked in without knocking. The door creaked just like it used to when I came home from school. Except this time, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel like a guest in someone else's life. I felt like the rightful owner of a truth they tried to bury. They were in the living room, Caleb with a bottle of bourbon in one hand, Mark holding a laptop open with spreadsheets. When they saw me, Caleb raised an eyebrow. Thought we were done playing family. Not quite, I said, stepping forward and dropping a thick folder on the coffee table between them. They looked down, confused. What is this? Mark asked. The truth, I said. The legal documents for the trust fund Mom and Dad never told me about. The one they were legally responsible for protecting. The one they ignored. Caleb scoffed, flipping open the folder. His smirk faded by the second. Mark leaned over and muttered, This has their signatures. Diane's, Jack's. From 1994. And that's not all, I said, pulling out the letter from Grace, now preserved in a clear sleeve. This is from my birth mother. She trusted them. She believed they'd pass everything on to me when the time came. They raised you, Mark snapped. You wouldn't have had anything without them. I stared at him, calm but cold. Raised me? I said. They clothed me, yes, fed me, gave me a roof. But they never let me forget I wasn't one of you. And now I know why, because they were sitting on my inheritance, my identity, my truth. Caleb stood up, defensive. So what? You got a pity letter from some woman who gave you away? Doesn't mean she owns the past 30 years. No, I said, stepping forward. But she owns her legacy. And she left it to me. Not to you. Not to people who treated me like an outsider in my own home. There was a long pause. Then Caleb laughed, but it was hollow now. You're not seriously thinking of taking this to court. I don't need to, I said. Mr. Gibbons already confirmed it. The trust is legally mine. You withheld information. You never notified me at 25. That's not just unethical. It's fraud. You have no idea what you're doing, Mark said through clenched teeth. Actually, I said. For the first time, I turned to leave, then stopped at the doorway. You had a chance, I said softly. You could have done the right thing. You could have honored her wish and given me back my part of the story. But you didn't. You buried it with her. And now all I'm doing is digging it back up. Behind me, I could hear Caleb's voice crack with panic. We'll fight this. You don't get to waltz back in, and I turned and cut him off. I'm not waltzing. I'm reclaiming. They thought keeping me in the dark would keep me in my place, but the truth doesn't stay buried forever, especially not when it's written in ink, sealed in trust, and backed by a mother's love. The morning after the confrontation, I found myself sitting once again in Mr. Gibbons' office, this time not as the forgotten daughter, but as a woman ready to claim what had always been hers. He slid a folder across the table, this one newer than the last. I filed a notice of breach of fiduciary duty against the Carter estate, he said. And with your birth mother's documentation, it's an airtight case. Breach of fiduciary duty. Such a clinical phrase for what really happened. Betrayal, theft, silence used as a weapon. They stole time, I murmured, staring at the crisp legal pages. They stole a connection I could have had. With her, with myself. Mr. Gibbons nodded. But now, you're taking it back. We began the legal process immediately, motioning to have the trust officially activated under my control, and petitioning to audit the Carter estate's management of it over the last 3 decades. Because even if they hadn't touched the money, their silence had cost me more than finances. It had cost me family. When the papers were served, Caleb tried to call me. I didn't pick up. Instead, I watched as he left a voicemail full of false apologies. We didn't know how to tell you. It wasn't our decision. You don't want to destroy what's left of the family. But what family? The one that erased me? The one that sat in silence while I lived paycheck to paycheck, thinking I was lucky to be in their house? No. That family died the day they chose greed over truth. A week later, we had our first mediation hearing. They came in with new suits, flanked by high-priced lawyers who threw around phrases like family discretion, emotional oversight, and miscommunication. But Mr. Gibbons was ready. He laid out the paper trail, trust documents, certified letters returned unopened, a notarized letter from Grace herself, and the damning lack of any documented effort by Jack or Diane to notify me after I turned 25. The room fell silent as he finished. Then he turned to the judge and said calmly, "My client doesn't seek revenge. She seeks restoration, and that's exactly what the law entitles her to." The judge agreed. Within 2 weeks, the court awarded me full control of the trust, with back penalties for mismanagement. Caleb and Mark were ordered to return any assets they may have touched and to submit financial statements for the past 5 years. But the best part? It wasn't the money. It was the moment I walked out of that courtroom into a cool, sunlit afternoon, knowing I wasn't carrying the shame anymore. I hadn't been forgotten. I'd been hidden. But now, I was seen. Later that month, I visited Grace's grave for the first time. I brought her favorite tea, raspberry, and a copy of her book, The Borrowed Room, the one that told our story in fiction before I ever knew it was real. "I found your voice, Mom," I whispered, "and I'm going to make sure the world hears it." That day, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let this end with a legal victory. I was going to do what Grace did, turn pain into purpose. So I called a foundation that specialized in advocacy for adopted children and offered to sponsor a scholarship program in Grace's name, the Whitmore Legacy Grant, for girls in foster care pursuing education in writing or technology, because somewhere out there, another girl was wondering if she mattered, and I wanted her to know she did. They thought I'd walk away with a check and a closed mouth, but they forgot. I was my mother's daughter, and I was just getting started. For weeks after the court ruling, I kept thinking about Grace, not just as the woman who gave birth to me, but as the person who had fought for me in the only way she could. Through words, through paper, through ink and willpower and unwavering love tucked between folded pages and trust documents. And I realized something. Her story didn't deserve to end with a legal file buried in courthouse archives. It deserved to live, to breathe, to mean something for others the way it now meant everything to me. So I launched the Whitmore Legacy Grant. At first, it was just a small scholarship, $10,000 a year to a foster care youth who wanted to study either literature or software engineering. I chose those two paths not just because they reflected Grace in me, but because they were forms of voice, writing, and coding. Two ways to shape the world when no one listens to what you say. Within a month, the response was overwhelming. Applications poured in, emails, letters. Journalists wanted to talk. Grace's books were suddenly being rediscovered, reviewed on Goodreads, highlighted by book clubs under Hidden Gems by late female authors. And suddenly, I found myself on the phone with a publisher. "We read The Borrowed Room," the editor said. "We had no idea it was based on a real story. Would you consider writing a foreword if we republish it?" I agreed, and then I did one better. I started writing my own book. It wasn't a memoir, not really. It was a series of letters, like the one Grace had left me, structured like a dialogue between mother and daughter, between silence and truth, between loss and reclamation. I titled it, "The Letter She Left." And the moment I submitted the manuscript, I cried. Not because I was sad, but because for the first time I felt whole. Writing it was like stitching myself together, one chapter at a time, one truth at a time. But it wasn't just about healing myself. I wanted to reach people like me, those who had been left out of wills, out of family photos, out of the very story of their own lives. So I gave talks at adoption support groups. I volunteered to teach coding at transitional housing centers. And every time I stood in front of a room full of young women, confused, angry, lost, I told them the truth. You are not here by accident. You are not an afterthought. Someone loved you so much they left behind something the world tried to erase. Your job isn't to fit into someone else's legacy. Your job is to build your own. And you know what? They listened, because I wasn't speaking from a podium. I was speaking from inside the same ache they carried. The ache of not being chosen. The ache of being chosen once and then hidden. But now, I was visible. I was building something real. something Grace would have been proud of. I spent years believing I was invisible, that the silence meant I wasn't enough. But my mother didn't leave me with silence. She left me with a seed, and now that seed had grown into something powerful. Not just a trust fund, not just a scholarship, but a legacy with my name on it and hers, side by side, forever. It started with a single blog post. I hadn't planned to write it. It just poured out one sleepless night, somewhere between memory and fury, somewhere between gratitude for Grace and the lingering ache of the family that discarded me. I titled it, "The Letter They Hid, the Love She Left." In it, I told the whole story, honestly, painfully. Not as a victim, but as someone reclaiming her voice. I wrote about the will, the trust, the silence, the shame, the justice, and most importantly, the letter from Grace that changed everything. I didn't expect it to go viral, but it did. Within 72 hours, over 400,000 views. Then came the emails, hundreds of them, from adoptees, from foster kids, from people who had been left out of their family legacies, both emotionally and financially, people who had been made to feel like they didn't count. One woman wrote, "I was erased from my father's obituary after he remarried. I thought I was alone in that kind of pain. Thank you for giving it a name." A man wrote, "I was the only one left out of the family business because I was adopted from Korea. You've given me permission to stop apologizing for existing." It broke me and healed me all at once. And then the calls started. Podcasts, book clubs, news outlets. Everyone wanted to know the same thing. How did you find the courage to tell the truth? The answer? I didn't. The truth found me, in a sealed envelope, written in Grace's own hand. I just made the choice to open it. That was the difference between a life dictated by silence and one reclaimed through voice. A week later, I appeared on a live morning show, sitting under bright lights with a copy of Grace's book in one hand and mine in the other. I looked into the camera and said, "To anyone watching who's been treated like a footnote in your own family story, this is your sign. You don't need permission to matter. You already do." After that, I got a call from a production company. They wanted to option my book for a limited series. And while part of me worried it was too much too fast, another part of me, Grace's daughter, knew it was what she would have wanted. Not fame, but reach, impact, legacy. She wrote stories to survive heartbreak. I was turning our heartbreak into one. Soon, The Letter She Left was climbing bestseller lists, and on the inside cover, I'd printed a simple line, "For Grace Whitmore, my mother, my story, my truth." But the most powerful moment? It came unexpectedly. I was at a book signing when a teenage girl approached me. She didn't say a word at first, just handed me a copy of my book and pulled something from her backpack. It was a worn photo of a woman holding a baby. She looked me in the eye and whispered, "I think this is my birth mom. I've never told anyone before." I stood up, wrapped my arms around her, and whispered back, "You're allowed to start your story. Today." Because I knew what that moment felt like. I had lived it. I used to think family was something you were born into. Now I know. It's something you build from truth, from courage, and from choosing to love even when the world told you not to. And this time, I was writing the story myself. It had been almost a year since the day I walked out of that lawyer's office with nothing but a letter, and everything I never knew I needed. Now, I stood in front of the Carter family house, not as a visitor, not as the girl who used to sleep in the smallest room with the creaky floorboard and peeling paint, but as me, as the rightful heir to my mother's legacy, as someone who had finally learned that being left out didn't mean I was less. It meant the story hadn't been finished yet. The house was empty now. Caleb and Mark had moved out after the court's decision. They didn't fight anymore, not because they accepted the truth, but because they couldn't outrun it. The truth doesn't knock, it enters. I walked through the hallway slowly, letting my fingers graze the edges of old door frames, memories flooding back in fragments. That corner where I used to sit and read alone during family parties, the kitchen table where I ate dinner in silence, while Mark and Caleb cracked jokes and Mom laughed too loud. The living room where family photos hung, but none with me in them past age 10. It was strange how much a place could hold without ever offering comfort. And yet, I didn't feel bitter. Not anymore. Because I wasn't here to take anything back. I was here to say goodbye. I walked into what used to be my bedroom. Still dusty, still small. I sat at the edge of the bed and pulled out the final item in my bag. A framed photo of Grace holding me as a baby. And beside it, a handwritten letter I had written last week. I placed them gently on the old dresser. The letter said, "To the girl who once slept here, crying into her pillow, wondering if she mattered. You do. And to the family who never saw her. She sees herself now. She knows where she came from. She knows who she is. And she forgives you. But she will never forget." I locked the door behind me as I left. Not out of anger, but out of finality. That house, that life, it had shaped me, but it would never define me again. Outside, the sun was setting. The air smelled like fall, crisp, clean, full of endings and beginnings. I took one last look, then turned toward my car. A group of kids passed by on bikes, their laughter echoing in the distance. I smiled, because now I didn't carry the weight of being unloved. I carried legacy. I carried voice. I carried grace. And as I drove away, I thought about all the people still sitting in the silence I used to know, wondering if they'd ever be seen, heard, chosen. This story, my story, was for them. To the daughters who were never in the family photos, to the sons left out of the will, to the quiet ones, the different ones, the ones they never expected to rise. You are not a mistake. You are a chapter they tried to skip. But one day the world will read your name in bold. So here it is, my name, in ink, in light, in history. And this time, no one can take it away. Thank you for watching this story to the very end. If it moved you, inspired you, or reminded you of your own journey, please don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below. Your voice matters, your story matters, and we're here to tell it.